"Ma'am, you're under arrest for shoplifting. Empty your purse now." The words echoed through the sterile corridors of downtown Chicago's 12th District Police Station. Officer Derek Matthews towered over a petite black woman, his badge gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights, completely unaware that his world was about to crumble. Have you ever witnessed someone's arrogance become their downfall? What happens when a racist cop meets his match in the most unexpected way? Keisha Williams stood calmly in the cramped interrogation room, her designer briefcase at her feet, watching Officer Matthews rifle through security footage on his tablet. She had been grocery shopping with her 8-year-old daughter Maya when store security allegedly caught her concealing merchandise. The accusation was absurd. She had simply placed a pack of gum in her coat pocket while juggling Maya's school supplies and her phone. But Matthews saw something different. He saw another typical case, a young black mother trying to steal from an upscale grocery store in Lincoln Park. His prejudiced assumptions blinded him to the truth sitting right in front of him. "I've seen this story 100 times, Matthews sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Single mothers, probably on welfare, thinking they can just take whatever they want. Well, not on my watch." If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. And let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. We love hearing from our viewers around the world. Keisha remained silent, her dark eyes studying Matthews' every move. 20 years of experience as a civil rights attorney had taught her to recognize this type, the kind of officer who saw race before humanity, who used his badge as a weapon rather than a shield for justice. She had built her entire career fighting against people like him. What Matthews didn't know was that Keisha Williams wasn't just any lawyer. She was the lead attorney for the Chicago Civil Rights Coalition, the woman who had successfully prosecuted 12 police misconduct cases in the past 5 years alone. Her name struck fear into the hearts of corrupt officers across the city. "Look, lady," Matthews continued, leaning against the metal table, "we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Confess to the theft, and maybe we can work out a deal. Keep playing dumb and I'll make sure you spend the night in lockup while your kid goes into the system." The threat against Maya made Keisha's jaw tighten, almost imperceptibly. But she remained composed, knowing that every word, every action was being recorded. She had learned long ago that patience was her greatest weapon. Matthews pulled out his handcuffs, the metal clinking ominously in the small room. "I'm going to ask you one more time. Where did you hide the stolen merchandise? The security camera clearly shows you concealing items." "Officer Matthews," Keisha finally spoke, her voice steady and professional, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding here is you thinking you could get away with theft in my district," he shot back, moving closer. "I've dealt with your type before. You people always think you're entitled to whatever you want." Those words, "you people," hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Keisha's fingers moved almost imperceptibly toward her briefcase, where her business cards and bar certification lay waiting. The security footage continued playing on Matthews's tablet, showing Keisha at the checkout counter, clearly paying for her groceries. But Matthews had already made up his mind. In his world, the narrative was simple: guilty until proven innocent, especially if you were black. What Matthews couldn't see was the storm brewing behind Keisha's calm exterior. Soon, very soon, he would discover exactly who he was dealing with. But would his realization come too late to save his career? The 12th District Police Station stood like a fortress in Chicago's South Loop, its brick facade weathered by decades of urban decay and political promises. Built in 1987, it had become a symbol of everything wrong with the city's approach to policing: understaffed, undertrained, and overseen by officers who viewed their badges as licenses for unchecked authority. Officer Derek Matthews had been patrolling these streets for 8 years, long enough to develop the cynical worldview that now clouded his judgment. At 34, he carried himself with the swagger of someone who believed his uniform made him untouchable. His personnel file, buried deep in the department's bureaucracy, told a different story. 3 formal complaints for excessive force, 2 allegations of racial profiling, and a pattern of aggressive behavior that his supervisors consistently overlooked. Matthews came from a family of cops. His father, retired Sergeant Bill Matthews, had instilled in him a black and white view of justice that left no room for nuance or empathy. "There are good people and bad people, son," his father would say over Sunday dinners. "Your job is to keep the bad ones in line." Unfortunately, Derek's definition of bad people had become dangerously skewed by his own prejudices. Meanwhile, Keisha Williams represented everything Matthews feared most, an educated black woman who refused to be intimidated by his authority. At 38, she had overcome obstacles that would have broken most people. Raised by a single grandmother in Chicago's Englewood neighborhood, she had watched police harassment tear apart her community for years. The injustice she witnessed as a child had fueled her determination to become the voice for those who couldn't speak for themselves. Keisha's law office, located just 12 blocks from where she now sat, was lined with framed photographs of her victories, families reunited after wrongful arrests, officers held accountable for their crimes, communities given hope where none existed before. Her reputation preceded her in every courtroom in Cook County. Judges respected her meticulous preparation. Prosecutors feared her cross-examinations, and corrupt cops knew that facing Keisha Williams in court meant their careers were likely over. The grocery store incident had been orchestrated by more than simple racial profiling. Matthews was under pressure from his captain to increase arrest numbers in upscale neighborhoods, part of a misguided initiative to show that the department was tough on crime. Young black mothers shopping in predominantly white areas had become easy targets, their word against that of store security, their lack of resources making them unlikely to fight back legally. But Matthews had chosen the wrong target. Detective Sarah Chen, Matthews's partner of 3 years, watched the interrogation through the one-way mirror with growing unease. Unlike Matthews, Chen had actually reviewed the security footage carefully. The tape clearly showed Keisha paying for her items, including the pack of gum that supposedly triggered the theft allegation. Something didn't add up. Chen had worked with Matthews long enough to recognize his pattern. When he saw young black women in upscale establishments, his assumptions kicked in automatically. She had tried to address his bias before, but Matthews always had an excuse, always found a way to justify his actions. The interrogation room itself seemed to shrink as tensions mounted. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across Matthews' face as he continued his aggressive questioning. The recording equipment captured every word, every gesture, evidence that would soon become crucial in ways Matthews couldn't imagine. Keisha's daughter Maya waited in the station's family room, her small hands clutched around her school backpack. At 8 years old, she had already learned to recognize the looks her mother received in certain neighborhoods, the way some people's expressions changed when they saw their brown skin. She didn't fully understand the complex dynamics of racism, but she knew her mother was strong, that her mother fought for people who couldn't fight for themselves. The Chicago Police Department's history with civil rights was complicated at best. From the 1968 Democratic Convention riots to recent high-profile misconduct cases, the department had struggled to rebuild trust with minority communities. Officers like Matthews represented the old guard, those who resisted change, who viewed accountability as an attack on their authority rather than a necessary evolution of policing. As Matthews prepared to escalate his interrogation tactics, he remained blissfully unaware that he was about to become another cautionary tale in Keisha Williams's long list of victories against police misconduct. The question wasn't whether Matthews would fall, it was how far. The tension in the interrogation room reached a boiling point as Matthews slammed his hand on the metal table, making Keisha's briefcase jump. The sound echoed through the cramped space like a gunshot, but Keisha didn't flinch. She had faced far more intimidating tactics in her career. "I'm done playing games with you," Matthews snarled, his face reddening with frustration. "You're going to confess to this theft, or I'm going to make your life very difficult. Do you understand what I'm saying?" The threat was clear, and both of them knew it. Matthews was crossing a line that separated aggressive questioning from outright harassment. Every word was being recorded, every gesture captured by the room's security camera, evidence that would prove invaluable in the coming storm. Keisha leaned back in her chair, her expression remaining neutral despite the fire building in her chest. "Officer Matthews, I'm curious, have you actually reviewed the complete security footage from Grandview Market?" "I've seen enough," he snapped, waving dismissively at his tablet. "The store manager called it in personally. Said you were acting suspicious, concealing merchandise. That's all I need to know." What Matthews didn't realize was that Grandview Market's manager, Todd Brennan, had his own history of racial profiling. 3 similar complaints had been filed against the store in the past 18 months, all involving black customers, who were subsequently cleared of any wrongdoing. Keisha made a mental note to subpoena those records. Detective Chen opened the door to the interrogation room, her face tense with concern. "Matthews, can I speak with you for a moment?" "I'm in the middle of an interrogation, Chen. Whatever it is can wait." "It really can't," Chen insisted, her voice carrying an urgency that made Matthews pause. She had spent the last 20 minutes reviewing not just the security footage, but also running Keisha's name through the department's database. What she discovered had sent a chill down her spine. Reluctantly, Matthews stepped outside, leaving Keisha alone in the room. The moment the door closed, Keisha reached into her briefcase and pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved swiftly across the screen, sending a carefully crafted text message to her assistant. "Document everything. Potential case developing at 12th District. Officer Matthews, badge Digger 2847. Will need full background check and disciplinary records ASAP." Outside the room, Chen grabbed Matthews' arm. "Derek, we need to release her immediately. You have no idea who you're dealing with. She's a shoplifter, Chen, end of story. She's Keisha Williams, the civil rights attorney, the one who got Officer Rodriguez fired last year and cost the department $2.3 million in the Henderson settlement." Matthews' confident expression faltered for the first time. The Henderson case had been front-page news for weeks, an excessive force incident that resulted in a massive lawsuit and federal oversight of the department. Keisha Williams had been the attorney who dismantled the city's defense piece by piece. "You're wrong," Matthews said, but his voice lacked conviction. "That lawyer is older, different looking." "Check the database yourself," Chen urged, pulling out her phone to show him Keisha's official Bar Association photo. The resemblance was unmistakable. Meanwhile, inside the interrogation room, Keisha was conducting her own investigation. She had noticed something crucial that Matthews had overlooked in his rush to judgment. The timestamp on the security footage he had shown her was from the wrong date. The incident Grandview Market reported had supposedly occurred on Tuesday, but the footage Matthews was using as evidence was from Monday. Either this was a case of gross incompetence, or something more sinister was at play. Her phone buzzed with a response from her assistant. "Background check initiated. Preliminary search shows Matthews has pattern of complaints. Sending full report to your secure email now." The door burst open as Matthews returned. His demeanor noticeably changed. Gone was the aggressive confidence, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like panic. Chen followed close behind, her expression grim. "Mrs. Williams," Matthews began, his voice strained. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding." "Oh?" Keisha raised an eyebrow, her tone remaining perfectly calm. "What kind of misunderstanding would that be, Officer Matthews?" The security footage. We may have gotten our dates mixed up. These things happen sometimes in investigations." Keisha stood slowly, her full height commanding the small room, despite being significantly shorter than Matthews. "Officer Matthews, are you telling me that you arrested me based on security footage from the wrong day?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Matthews' mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. Chen stepped forward, trying to salvage what was clearly becoming a disaster. "Ma'am, we sincerely apologize for any inconvenience. You're free to go, of course. We'll have your belongings returned immediately." But Keisha wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. "Before I leave," she said, reaching into her briefcase once more, "I think there's something you both should see." She pulled out her business card and placed it on the table between them. The gold-embossed lettering seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights. Keisha Williams, J.D., Civil Rights Attorney, Chicago Civil Rights Coalition. Matthews stared at the card as if it were a death sentence, because in many ways it was. The silence in the interrogation room was deafening as Matthews stared at Keisha's business card. The gold lettering seemed to mock him, each word a nail in the coffin of his career. Detective Chen's face had gone pale, understanding the magnitude of what had just unfolded. "Jesus Christ, Derek," Chen whispered under her breath, stepping back from the table as if the business card carried a contagious disease. Keisha picked up her card and slipped it back into her briefcase with deliberate precision. "Officer Matthews, Detective Chen, I assume you're both familiar with Section 1983 of the Civil Rights Act. False arrest, deprivation of rights under color of law." Matthews' throat felt dry as sandpaper. He had heard those terms before, usually in the context of officers whose careers had ended in disgrace and financial ruin. "Look, Ms. Williams, this was just a routine investigation." "Routine?" Keisha's voice cut through his excuse like a scalpel. "You threatened to separate me from my 8-year-old daughter based on fabricated evidence. You used racial slurs. You people, which are all captured on this recording. Tell me, Officer Matthews, how many other black mothers have experienced your version of routine investigations?" The question struck at the heart of something much larger than this single incident. Keisha had been collecting data on the 12th District for months as part of a broader investigation into systemic racism within the Chicago Police Department. Matthews had just handed her the perfect case study. Detective Chen's phone buzzed with a text from Captain Rodriguez. "Need you in my office now. Bring Matthews. We have a problem." Someone had been monitoring the situation from upstairs. The fact that Keisha Williams was in their station, being questioned for shoplifting, had already reached the captain's desk. Damage control was about to begin. "Ma'am," Chen said carefully, "perhaps we could step outside and discuss this situation more privately?" "Why would I want to do that, Detective?" Keisha asked, her tone remaining professionally cool. "This room is recording our conversation, which means there's an official record of everything that's been said. Moving to a private location might give the impression that you're trying to cover something up." Meanwhile, 3 floors above in the station's administrative offices, Captain Maria Rodriguez was frantically making phone calls. The first was to the department's legal counsel, the second to the media relations department, and the third to Deputy Chief Thompson. Each conversation began the same way. "We have a situation with Keisha Williams." The ripple effects were already beginning. Rodriguez knew that within hours, this incident would be on the desk of every civil rights organization in the city. The Chicago Civil Rights Coalition had a network that could mobilize public opinion faster than the department could issue a press release. Back in the interrogation room, Matthews was beginning to understand the full scope of his mistake. This wasn't just about one wrongful arrest. It was about a pattern of behavior that could be traced through years of complaints and incidents. Keisha Williams had the resources and experience to dig up every questionable arrest he had ever made, every complaint that had been buried in bureaucratic paperwork. "Officer Matthews," Keisha continued, "I'm curious about something. How many times in the past year have you arrested black women for shoplifting in upscale neighborhoods?" I ask, because I've been tracking arrest statistics for the 12th District, and there seems to be an interesting pattern. The blood drained from Matthews' face. He was beginning to realize that this wasn't a random encounter. Keisha Williams might have been investigating him long before today's incident. Chen's phone rang, and she answered immediately. "Detective Chen, yes sir, we'll be right up." She hung up and looked at Matthews with something approaching pity. "Captain wants to see us, now." "Before you go," Keisha said, standing and adjusting her suit jacket, "I want to make something very clear. This isn't over, not by a long shot. Officer Matthews, you made 3 critical errors today. First, you assumed my guilt based on racial profiling. Second, you threatened my relationship with my daughter. Third, and most importantly, you chose the wrong person to victimize." She moved toward the door, then paused. "I'll be filing a formal complaint with Internal Affairs within the hour. I'll also be requesting a federal investigation into the pattern of discriminatory arrests in this district. Detective Chen, since you seem to have some awareness of the situation, I'd recommend you distance yourself from Officer Matthews' methods before you become collateral damage." Matthews found his voice, desperation creeping into his tone. "Ms. Williams, surely we can work something out. This was all just a misunderstanding." "Officer Matthews," Keisha interrupted, her voice carrying the weight of 20 years of legal experience. "The only misunderstanding here was yours. You underestimated who you were dealing with. That mistake is going to cost you everything." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Matthews and Chen alone with the devastating realization that their world had just changed forever. In the hallway, Keisha walked toward the family room where Maya was waiting, her mind already organizing the legal strategy that would bring justice not just for herself, but for every other victim of Matthews' prejudice. The game had begun, and Keisha Williams never lost. Captain Maria Rodriguez's office felt like a pressure cooker as Matthews and Chen stood at attention before her desk. The captain's usually composed demeanor had cracked, revealing the panic beneath. Behind her, the wall was lined with commendations and photos from community events, ironic decorations given the crisis now unfolding. "Sit down," Rodriguez commanded, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Do either of you have any idea what you've just done?" Detective Chen glanced nervously at Matthews, who remained standing with stubborn defiance. "Captain, We followed standard protocol for a shoplifting investigation. Standard protocol? Rodriguez's voice rose sharply. Matthews, I just got off the phone with Deputy Chief Thompson. Keisha Williams has already filed a preliminary complaint with Internal Affairs, and she's requesting a federal civil rights investigation. Do you understand what that means? The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of the busy station below. Matthews' jaw worked silently, his mind struggling to process the implications. Rodriguez turned her computer monitor toward them, displaying an email that had arrived just minutes earlier. This is from the Chicago Civil Rights Coalition. They're announcing a press conference for tomorrow morning regarding systemic racial profiling and false arrests at the 12th District. Guess whose name is mentioned specifically? Chen read the email over Matthews's shoulder, her stomach dropping as she saw the detailed allegations. This wasn't just about today's incident. The coalition had compiled a comprehensive report on arrest patterns, complaint histories, and what they termed discriminatory enforcement practices. Captain, Matthews finally spoke, his voice hoarse, this is all being blown out of proportion. It was a simple shoplifting case that got confused. Confused? Rodriguez stood abruptly, her chair rolling backward. Derek, she has you on recording using racial language, threatening to separate her from her child, and arresting her based on evidence from the wrong day. There's nothing confused about it. It's a textbook case of civil rights violations. The captain moved to the window overlooking the station's parking lot, where local news vans were already beginning to gather. Someone had leaked the story, and the media frenzy was starting. Ma'am, Chen ventured, what about the store manager's complaint? Todd Brennan called it in personally. Rodriguez turned back to them with a grim expression. I just spoke with Brennan. Funny thing, he claims he never called in any shoplifting complaint today. Says the first he heard about any incident was when our dispatch called to verify details. The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. If Brennan hadn't called in the complaint, then how had the arrest been initiated? Chen's mind raced through the possibilities, each one worse than the last. Derek, Rodriguez said slowly, I need you to tell me exactly how this arrest came about. From the beginning. And I need the truth, because Internal Affairs is going to tear apart every detail. Matthew's confident facade finally crumbled. He slumped into his chair, his hands shaking slightly as the full weight of his situation became clear. I saw her in the store. She looked out of place, you know. Expensive neighborhood, and she was... He trailed off, realizing how his words sounded. She was what, Officer Matthews? Rodriguez's voice was ice cold. Black. Is that what made her look out of place? Captain, you know the pressure we're under to increase arrests in those neighborhoods. The Community Relations Initiative, the Zero Tolerance policies. Don't you dare try to blame department policy for your racism, Rodriguez snapped. No policy tells you to fabricate evidence or use racial slurs. Chen cleared her throat nervously. Captain, there's something else. I reviewed Matthews' arrest records from the past year. There's a pattern. 17 arrests of black women for shoplifting in upscale areas, but only 3 convictions. Most of the cases were dropped due to lack of evidence. The silence that followed was deafening. Rodriguez closed her eyes, understanding that the situation was far worse than she had initially thought. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was evidence of systematic discrimination that could bring federal oversight to the entire department. Derek, she said finally, you're suspended pending investigation. Turn in your badge and weapon. Chen, you're being reassigned to desk duty until this is resolved. Matthew's face went white. Captain, please. I have a family, a mortgage. This job is all I know. You should have thought about that before you decided to play judge and jury based on someone's skin color, Rodriguez replied coldly. And Derek? Start looking for a good lawyer. Because Keisha Williams is about to make you famous for all the wrong reasons. As if summoned by her words, Rodriguez's phone rang. The caller ID showed it was the mayor's office. The political ramifications were beginning, and they would be swift and merciless. Outside the captain's office, the 12th District continued its daily operations, but an undercurrent of tension rippled through the building. Word was spreading quickly among the officers. Keisha Williams was in the house, and someone's career was about to end. The point of no return had been crossed. What started as a routine day had become a defining moment that would reshape careers, policies, and lives. And this was only the beginning. News of the incident spread through the Chicago Police Department faster than wildfire. By 4 p.m., every precinct commander in the city had received a memo from headquarters. All arrest procedures involving civil rights attorney Keisha Williams must be immediately reviewed and reported to Internal Affairs. Detective Chen sat at her temporary desk in the records department, staring at a computer screen filled with Matthews' arrest data. The pattern was undeniable and damning. 17 black women arrested for shoplifting in predominantly white neighborhoods over the past 12 months. 14 of those arrests had resulted in dropped charges due to insufficient evidence or procedural errors. The statistics painted a clear picture of racial profiling that would be impossible to defend in court. Meanwhile, 3 blocks away at the Chicago Civil Rights Coalition headquarters, Keisha's team had mobilized with military precision. Her assistant, Marcus Thompson, had compiled a comprehensive dossier on Officer Matthews' career. Every complaint, every questionable arrest, every incident that had been swept under the bureaucratic rug. The Henderson case was just the tip of the iceberg, Marcus reported to Keisha as she sat in her office, still wearing the same clothes from her ordeal at the station. Matthews was the arresting officer in 6 cases that resulted in civil rights settlements over the past 3 years. The city has paid out nearly $800,000 because of his actions. Keisha nodded grimly, making notes on her legal pad. And the department kept him on the street because political pressure to maintain arrest numbers in upscale districts, the community association complaints about undesirable elements in their neighborhoods. Matthews was doing exactly what his superiors wanted, keeping black people out of white spaces. The revelation was both shocking and entirely predictable. Keisha had seen this pattern before in dozens of other cases. Racist officers weren't rogue individuals acting alone. They were often the instruments of institutional policies designed to maintain racial segregation through selective enforcement. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya's school. "Mrs. Williams, Maya seems upset today. She mentioned something about police. Please call when convenient." The reminder of her daughter's trauma reignited Keisha's anger. This wasn't just about legal principles or civil rights violations. It was personal. Matthews had traumatized her child, threatened their family, and violated the basic trust between police and community that she had spent years trying to rebuild. Back at the 12th District, Captain Rodriguez was fielding calls from reporters, activists, and politicians. The Chicago Tribune had already posted an online story titled "Civil Rights Attorney Arrested on Questionable Shoplifting Charges." The comments section was exploding with outrage from community members sharing their own experiences with discriminatory policing. The phone calls were relentless. Alderman Patricia Johnson from the 4th Ward demanded an immediate meeting. The NAACP president wanted a formal statement. 3 different television news producers were requesting interviews. Most concerning was the call from Federal Bureau of Investigation Special Agent Sarah Mitchell. The FBI's Civil Rights Division had been monitoring police misconduct in Chicago, and the Williams incident had triggered their attention. "Captain Rodriguez," Agent Mitchell's voice was professional but stern, "we're opening a preliminary investigation into potential pattern and practice violations at your district. I'll need all records related to Officer Matthews' arrests for the past 2 years." The federal involvement escalated everything to a new level. What started as a single wrongful arrest was now a federal civil rights investigation that could result in court-ordered reforms, massive financial penalties, and federal oversight of the entire police department. Officer Matthews sat in his apartment, staring at the local news coverage of his case. His wife, Jennifer, had taken their 2 children to her mother's house after reporters started calling their home. His phone showed 17 missed calls from journalists seeking comment. The police union representative had already called with devastating news. "Derek, this is bigger than we can handle. With Matthews' history and the federal attention, the union can't provide full support. You're going to need private counsel." The financial implications hit him like a physical blow. Private attorneys for federal civil rights cases cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. His police pension was in jeopardy. His family's future was crumbling because of a decision he had made in 30 seconds of prejudiced judgment. Social media was brutal. Keisha Williams was trending on Twitter, with thousands of people sharing stories of police discrimination. Matthews' name was being mentioned alongside the worst examples of racist policing in recent memory. The consequences were cascading beyond anyone's ability to control them, and Keisha Williams was just getting started. 3 days after the incident, Keisha Williams stood before a packed conference room at the Chicago Civil Rights Coalition headquarters. The media attention had transformed a single case of police misconduct into a citywide conversation about systemic racism in law enforcement. But for Keisha, this moment represented something deeper, an opportunity to turn personal trauma into lasting change. "I've been fighting police misconduct for 20 years, she began, her voice steady despite the cameras and bright lights. But experiencing it firsthand, with my daughter watching, reminded me why this work matters on the most personal level." The room was filled with journalists, community activists, and families who had experienced similar discrimination. Among them sat Detective Chen, who had requested to attend the press conference. Her presence surprised many, including Keisha herself. Maya sat in the front row, her small hands folded in her lap. She had insisted on coming, telling her mother, "I want to see you be strong for other kids too." The 8-year-old's resilience had taught Keisha something profound about courage. It wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. "The question isn't whether Officer Matthews is a bad person," Keisha continued. "The question is how we create systems that prevent good people from making bad decisions based on unconscious bias, and hold accountable those who choose prejudice over justice." Behind the scenes, Keisha's legal strategy was evolving beyond simple litigation. She had assembled a team of researchers, former police officers, and community organizers to develop a comprehensive reform proposal. The goal wasn't just to punish Matthews, but to create lasting institutional change. Dr. Angela Foster, a psychology professor from Northwestern University who specialized in implicit bias training, had joined Keisha's team. "We're not just fighting individual racism," Dr. Foster explained to the assembled group. "We're challenging the cultural and procedural frameworks that allow bias to flourish in police departments." The data they had compiled was staggering. The 12th District showed arrest rates for black citizens that were 340% higher than the district's demographic composition would suggest. Property crime arrests in affluent neighborhoods disproportionately targeted minorities, while similar crimes in predominantly white areas resulted in warnings or citations. Detective Chen had provided crucial inside information about department culture. She described a reward system that incentivized arrests over community policing, performance metrics that measured success by numbers rather than community trust, and informal training that taught officers to view certain neighborhoods and demographics as inherently suspicious. "I joined the force to serve and protect," Chen said during a private meeting with Keisha's team, "but I've watched good officers get corrupted by a system that rewards prejudice and punishes those who speak up." Chen's decision to cooperate with the investigation had cost her friendships within the department, but it had also opened a path toward redemption. She began working with Keisha to identify other officers who might be willing to support reform efforts from within. Meanwhile, Keisha was grappling with her own growth as both an attorney and a mother. The incident had forced her to confront the reality that her professional success couldn't fully protect her family from the systemic racism she fought every day. This recognition deepened her commitment to change, but also made her advocacy more personal and urgent. Her conversations with Maya had evolved into teaching moments about justice, resilience, and the importance of standing up for others. "Mommy fights for people who can't fight for themselves," Maya had told her teacher when asked about the news coverage. The comment made Keisha realize that her daughter was learning lessons about activism and social responsibility that would shape her entire life. The federal investigation was progressing rapidly. FBI Special Agent Mitchell had uncovered evidence of what she called institutionalized discrimination that went beyond individual officer misconduct. The Department of Justice was considering a consent decree that would place the Chicago Police Department under federal oversight. City officials were scrambling to get ahead of the federal intervention. Mayor Catherine Walsh announced the creation of a police accountability task force, with Keisha Williams invited to serve as co-chair, alongside retired police superintendent David Kim. "This is bigger than one case, bigger than one officer," Keisha told her team during a strategy meeting. "We have an opportunity to fundamentally change how policing works in Chicago, but that means we have to be willing to work with people who were part of the problem." The decision to accept the mayor's invitation wasn't easy. Many of her allies in the activist community viewed cooperation with city government as a betrayal of more radical reform goals. But Keisha understood that lasting change required working within existing systems while simultaneously pressuring them from outside. Officer Matthews had inadvertently created the catalyst for transformational change. His moment of prejudiced judgment was becoming the foundation for a new approach to police accountability that could serve as a model for cities across the country. The student had become the teacher, and the victim had become the architect of justice. 2 weeks after the initial incident, the federal courthouse in downtown Chicago buzzed with anticipation. The U.S. Department of Justice had accelerated their investigation into the Chicago Police Department, and today's hearing would determine whether federal oversight was necessary. Keisha Williams sat at the plaintiff's table, her legal team arranged around her like generals preparing for battle. Officer Derek Matthews entered the courthouse through a side entrance, flanked by his attorney and union representative. The media gauntlet outside had been brutal. Reporters shouting questions about his arrest record, protesters holding signs demanding justice, and community members sharing stories of their own encounters with discriminatory policing. Federal Judge Patricia Morrison presided over the proceedings with the gravity the case deserved. She had reviewed thousands of pages of evidence compiled by both the FBI and Keisha's legal team. The pattern of misconduct was so clear that even Matthews' defenders had shifted from denying discrimination to arguing about appropriate remedies. "Your Honor," Keisha began her opening statement, "this case represents more than one officer's prejudice. It exposes a system that has failed to protect the constitutional rights of Chicago's minority citizens for decades." She moved to an easel displaying arrest statistics from the 12th District. The numbers told a damning story. Black citizens were arrested at rates far exceeding their representation in the population, while conviction rates for those same arrests were significantly lower than departmental averages. Officer Matthews didn't act in a vacuum, Keisha continued. He was the product of a culture that rewards arrests over justice, that measures success by numbers rather than community trust. Matthews' attorney Robert Kellerman struggled with a defense that had become increasingly untenable. 3 more victims had come forward with similar stories of harassment and false arrest. The pattern was too consistent to dismiss as isolated incidents. Detective Chen had emerged as a crucial witness for the prosecution. Her testimony about department culture and training practices provided insider validation of Keisha's arguments. More importantly, her willingness to speak truth to power had inspired other officers to come forward. The system rewarded officers like Matthews for aggressive enforcement in certain neighborhoods, Chen testified. Community policing wasn't valued. Building relationships wasn't measured. Arrests were the only metric that mattered for promotions and favorable assignments. Behind the scenes, political pressure was mounting from multiple directions. The mayor's office was desperate to avoid federal oversight, which would bring national attention to Chicago's policing problems. The police union was fighting to protect Matthews while distancing themselves from his methods. Community organizations were demanding immediate reforms and accountability. Captain Rodriguez had been reassigned pending the investigation's outcome. Her replacement, Captain James Washington, was a reform-minded officer who had been brought in specifically to rebuild community trust. His first act was implementing new training protocols developed in consultation with civil rights organizations. The FBI's investigation had uncovered documents that were devastating to the department's defense. Internal emails showed supervisors encouraging aggressive enforcement in problem areas. Coded language that everyone understood meant minority neighborhoods. Performance evaluations praised officers for proactive policing that resulted in high arrest numbers, regardless of conviction rates. Special Agent Mitchell presented evidence of what federal prosecutors called a pattern and practice of constitutional violations. The data showed that black citizens in Chicago were 5 times more likely to be arrested for discretionary offenses like disorderly conduct or resisting arrest, charges that often depended on officer interpretation rather than clear criminal behavior. Matthews sat silently through much of the testimony, his career and reputation disintegrating in real time. The union had negotiated a plea agreement that would allow him to resign in exchange for avoiding federal criminal charges, but the civil lawsuits would likely bankrupt him regardless. "Mr. Matthews," Judge Morrison addressed him directly, "do you understand that your actions have not only harmed individual citizens, but have damaged the relationship between law enforcement and the community you swore to serve. Yes, Your Honor, Matthews replied, his voice barely audible. For the first time since the incident began, he seemed to grasp the full scope of his impact. Keisha watched this exchange with mixed emotions. She felt no satisfaction in Matthews' downfall, only a determination to ensure that his victims received justice and that future victims would be prevented through systematic reform. The hearing's climax would come down to Judge Morrison's decision about federal oversight. If granted, it would represent one of the most significant interventions in police department operations in recent memory. If denied, the burden of reform would fall to local officials who had already proven incapable of addressing systemic problems. Maya sat in the gallery, her school having given her permission to attend this historic moment. She had asked to be present because, as she told her mother, "I want to see what justice looks like." Outside the courthouse, hundreds of community members gathered in support of federal intervention. They carried signs reading, "Justice for all" and "End police racism." The peaceful demonstration represented a cross-section of Chicago's diversity. Black, Latino, white, and Asian residents united in demanding accountable policing. The moment of truth was approaching. 20 years of Keisha Williams' career had led to this point. The opportunity to transform pain into progress, discrimination into justice. The future of policing in Chicago hung in the balance. Judge Morrison returned to the courtroom after a 2-hour recess, her expression grave as she prepared to deliver a decision that would reshape law enforcement in America's third-largest city. The packed courtroom fell silent, 200 people holding their collective breath as history prepared to unfold. After reviewing the extensive evidence presented by both parties, Judge Morrison began, her voice carrying the weight of judicial authority. This court finds that the Chicago Police Department has engaged in a pattern and practice of constitutional violations that require immediate federal intervention. The words hung in the air like thunder. Keisha felt her heart racing as she realized that years of advocacy had culminated in this moment of vindication. Behind her, Maya squeezed her mother's hand, understanding that something important was happening even if she couldn't grasp all the legal complexities. The evidence shows systematic discrimination based on race, inadequate training on constitutional policing, and a culture that prioritizes arrests over community safety. Judge Morrison continued, Officer Matthews' actions were not aberrant behavior. They were the predictable result of institutional failures. Matthews slumped in his chair, the full weight of his role in this disaster finally hitting him. His attorney placed a hand on his shoulder, but there was no comfort to be found. He had become the face of police racism in Chicago, the cautionary tale that would be taught in police academies for years to come. Detective Chen watched from the gallery, tears streaming down her face. Her decision to testify against the department had cost her friends and threatened her career. But this moment validated every difficult choice she had made. Real change was possible, even within systems that seemed irredeemably broken. The court hereby orders the Chicago Police Department to enter into a consent decree with the U.S. Department of Justice, Judge Morrison announced. This agreement will require comprehensive reforms to training, supervision, data collection, and community engagement practices. The courtroom erupted in applause and cheers from community members who had waited decades for this level of accountability. Keisha stood and embraced her legal team, emotion overwhelming her professional composure. They had won more than a case. They had won the foundation for transformational change. Special Agent Mitchell approached the podium to outline the consent decree's requirements. The Chicago Police Department will implement bias-free training for all officers, establish independent oversight of misconduct investigations, and develop community policing strategies designed to rebuild trust with minority communities. The reforms would be expensive, estimated at over $100 million over 5 years, but the cost of continuing the status quo had proven even higher. The city had paid out nearly $50 million in police misconduct settlements in the previous year alone. Mayor Walsh stood at the back of the courtroom, her political future now tied to successful implementation of the court-ordered reforms. The federal oversight would bring national scrutiny to Chicago's policing problems, but it also provided political cover for difficult changes that previous administrations had avoided. Officer Matthews, Judge Morrison addressed him directly, while criminal charges have been resolved through your plea agreement, This court wants to emphasize that your actions have caused immeasurable harm to community trust and individual lives. Matthews stood slowly, his face pale and drawn. Your Honor, I want to apologize to Ms. Williams and her daughter. I let my prejudices cloud my judgment, and I caused pain that I can never undo. The apology felt inadequate given the scope of the damage, but it represented the first time Matthews had acknowledged the racial motivation behind his actions. Keisha appreciated the gesture, while recognizing that personal accountability was only the beginning of necessary change. Ms. Williams, Judge Morrison continued, this court commends your courage in pursuing this case and your commitment to systematic reform rather than simply personal vindication. Your advocacy has created an opportunity for lasting change that will benefit countless future citizens. Keisha rose to address the court one final time. Your Honor, this case was never about revenge against Officer Matthews or the Chicago Police Department. It was about creating a system where my daughter and all children can trust that law enforcement will treat them with dignity and respect, regardless of their race. She looked back at Maya, who was sitting with Keisha's mother in the front row. Today we've taken a crucial step toward that goal, but the real work begins now. Implementation of these reforms will require ongoing vigilance from community members, cooperation from police officers who want to serve with honor, and leadership from officials who prioritize justice over politics. As the court session concluded, participants filed out into the bright Chicago afternoon. Media crews captured reaction from all sides, celebration from civil rights advocates, resignation from police union representatives, and cautious optimism from city officials. The consent decree would take years to fully implement, and resistance from within the police department was inevitable. But the legal framework for change was now in place, backed by federal authority and community pressure. Officer Matthews walked out of the courthouse a broken man, his career ended, and his reputation destroyed. But his downfall had created the catalyst for progress that advocates had sought for decades. Sometimes, justice emerged from the ashes of injustice, and prejudice became the foundation for equality. The revolution in Chicago policing had begun. 6 months after Judge Morrison's historic ruling, the transformation of Chicago policing was evident throughout the city. The consent decree had moved from legal document to living reality, reshaping how officers approached their daily interactions with community members. Keisha Williams stood in the renovated community room of the 12th District Police Station, addressing a mixed group of officers, residents, and city officials. The monthly community policing meetings had become a cornerstone of the reform process, creating dialogue where suspicion and hostility had previously existed. Change is never easy, Keisha told the assembled group, but the past 6 months have shown that it's possible when people of good faith commit to doing better. Officer Lisa Rodriguez, one of Matthew's former colleagues, raised her hand. Ms. Williams, I want to thank you for helping us remember why we became police officers in the first place. The new training has made me more conscious of my biases and more effective at building community trust. The comment represented a broader shift within the department. While some officers had resisted the reforms, many others had embraced the opportunity to practice constitutional policing that actually made communities safer. Detective Chen, now promoted to sergeant and serving as the department's community relations coordinator, presented the latest statistics. Complaints against officers are down 40%, but more importantly, community cooperation with investigations has increased by 60%. When people trust police, they're more willing to help solve crimes. The data told a remarkable story of transformation. Use of force incidents had decreased dramatically, while crime clearance rates had actually improved. The new training protocols emphasized de-escalation, cultural competency, and constitutional policing methods that protected both officers and civilians. Maya Williams, now 9 years old, had become an unexpected symbol of the reform's success. She regularly accompanied her mother to community meetings, where her presence reminded everyone why police accountability mattered. The trauma she had experienced in that interrogation room had been transformed into a motivation for ensuring other children never faced similar treatment. "I'm not scared of police anymore," Maya told a reporter during a recent interview. "My mum helped make them better at their jobs." Former officer Derek Matthews had moved to a small town in Wisconsin, where he worked at his brother-in-law's auto repair shop. The civil lawsuits had indeed bankrupted him, but he had used the experience to begin speaking at police academies about the dangers of racial bias in law enforcement. His message was simple: don't let prejudice destroy your career and harm innocent people like I did. The federal oversight had brought national attention to Chicago's policing reforms, with delegations from other cities visiting to learn about implementation strategies. The model developed in Chicago was being adapted for use in departments across the country. Captain James Washington, who had replaced Rodriguez as head of the 12th District, credited Keisha Williams with helping create a new culture of accountability. She could have simply sued us into bankruptcy, he said. Instead, she chose to work with us to build something better. The financial costs of reform had been substantial, but they paled in comparison to the previous costs of misconduct lawsuits and community distrust. The city was saving millions of dollars annually, while providing better police services to all residents. Keisha's legal practice had evolved to focus primarily on police reform consulting. She worked with departments across the country to implement constitutional policing practices before federal intervention became necessary. The proactive approach was proving more effective than litigation alone. The goal was never to destroy police departments, Keisha explained to a gathering of police chiefs from around the Midwest. The goal was to help them fulfill their mission of serving and protecting all community members equally. As the community meeting concluded, Keisha looked around the room at the diverse group of people working together toward common goals. The transformation hadn't been perfect. There were still incidents, still resistance, still work to be done. But the foundation for lasting change had been established. Maya tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mom, are you proud of what we did?" Keisha smiled down at her daughter, remembering the frightened little girl who had waited in that police station 6 months ago. "I'm proud of what we're still doing, baby. Change doesn't happen all at once. It happens one conversation, one training session, one officer at a time." The fight for justice was never finished, but today's victories provided hope for tomorrow's progress. From the ashes of discrimination, a new model of policing had emerged, one based on respect, accountability, and the radical idea that all citizens deserved equal treatment under law. Officer Matthews' moment of prejudice had inadvertently created a legacy of justice that would protect countless future generations. 3 years later, Maya Williams walked confidently through the halls of her middle school, wearing a T-shirt that read, "Future Civil Rights Lawyer." The incident that had traumatized her as an 8-year-old had become the foundation for her understanding of justice and advocacy. Keisha watched her daughter's transformation with amazement and pride. Maya had not only overcome her fear of police, but had developed a sophisticated understanding of systemic inequality that would serve her well in whatever career she chose. The Chicago Police Department's reforms had become a national model for constitutional policing. Crime rates had continued to decline, while community trust had reached levels not seen in decades. The consent decree was scheduled to end the following year, with federal monitors expressing confidence that the changes had become permanently embedded in department culture. Detective Sarah Chen had been promoted to lieutenant and was leading the department's new civil rights enforcement unit. Her willingness to speak truth to power during the Williams case had marked her as a reformer, and she had used that reputation to build bridges between police and community that seemed impossible just a few years earlier. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't reviewed that security footage carefully," Chen reflected during a recent interview. Keisha Williams would have found another way to fight for justice, but maybe the changes wouldn't have come as quickly. Derek Matthews had completed a master's degree in social work and was working with formerly incarcerated individuals in Wisconsin. His journey from racist cop to advocate for criminal justice reform had been painful, but transformative. He regularly shared his story as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked prejudice. "I destroyed my life and traumatized an innocent family because I let hate cloud my judgment," Matthews told a group of police recruits during a recent visit to the Chicago Police Academy. "Don't make my mistakes. See people as human beings first, not as stereotypes." The federal oversight had officially ended, but many of the reforms continued voluntarily. Community policing meetings were now held in every district. Implicit bias training was mandatory for all officers. Data on arrests and complaints was published quarterly for public review. Keisha Williams had been appointed to the Illinois Police Training Board, where she worked to ensure that the lessons learned in Chicago were applied statewide. Her law practice continued to focus on police reform, but now departments sought her assistance proactively rather than waiting for lawsuits. The goal was always to create systemic change, Keisha said during a recent speech at Northwestern University Law School. Individual accountability was important, but institutional transformation was essential. Maya, now 11 years old, often accompanied her mother to speaking engagements. She had become comfortable addressing audiences about her experience and its aftermath. "My mom always says that bad things can become good things if you work hard enough to change them," Maya told a group of law students. "What happened to us was scary, but it helped make things better for lots of other kids." The legacy of that traumatic day in the 12th District interrogation room continued to ripple outward, creating waves of positive change that would protect future generations from the discrimination Maya and Keisha had faced. Justice delayed had become justice delivered, with interest. If you watched until the end, comment, "I watched until the final," and let us know which city you're watching from. We love connecting with our global audience. This powerful story of transformation reminds us that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about creating lasting change that protects everyone's rights. Keisha Williams' courage to stand up against discrimination didn't just vindicate her own experience. It created a model for police reform that has protected thousands of other families. The case of Officer Matthews serves as a crucial reminder that prejudice has real consequences, not just for victims but for perpetrators who allow bias to guide their actions. His downfall was tragic but necessary, creating the space for officers like Detective Chen to step forward and champion constitutional policing. What makes this story especially compelling is how personal trauma became the catalyst for systemic change. Maya Williams' experience in that police station could have been just another example of racial profiling, but her mother's expertise and determination transformed it into a landmark case for civil rights. The reforms implemented in Chicago, bias training, community policing, data transparency, and federal oversight, provide a blueprint that other cities have successfully adapted. The story shows that change is possible when communities demand accountability, and when good people within institutions are willing to support reform. But perhaps the most important lesson is about resilience and hope. Maya Williams went from being a frightened 8-year-old to becoming a confident advocate for justice. Her transformation mirrors the broader changes in Chicago policing, proving that even systems that seem broken can be repaired with dedication and hard work. Detective Chen's evolution from bystander to reformer demonstrates that institutional change often requires courage from within. Her willingness to testify against misconduct created the insider perspective that made meaningful reform possible. The story also highlights the importance of legal expertise in fighting discrimination. Keisha Williams' knowledge of civil rights law transformed what could have been just another complaint into a federal case that mandated systematic change. Today, the Chicago Police Department serves as a model for constitutional policing, but the work continues. Community members remain vigilant, officers embrace ongoing training, and leaders prioritize accountability over politics. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice and transformation. Your support helps us continue sharing these important narratives that inspire positive change. Click on the video that appears on your screen to watch another incredible story of courage and justice. Thanks for being part of our community of changemakers.